Now, with a roundup of the day's headlines here on ITV1, it's the lunchtime news.
Prince Harry accuses his brother of physically attacking him. The royal feud surely just worsened. The new allegations have emerged after The Guardian saw a copy of the Duke's new book ahead of the ITV interview examining Harry's fractured relationship with his family.
I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better.
Didn't your brother say to you, Harry, how could you do this to me? After everything we went through, wouldn't that be what he would say?
He'd probably say all sorts of different things.
Our royal editor Chris Shipp will join me for his thoughts on that interview and the new allegations in that book. Also this lunchtime. Applause for the former Pope as thousands gather for Benedict XVI's historic Vatican funeral. Here, more strikes if you try to stop us from striking, the warning from ASLEF to the government. And a stamp of approval from the Royal Mail, why Iron Maiden might be seen on your letters.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. A new book, a new interview, a new allegation. If the royal family hoped this would be a quieter year in the tale of the troubled relationship between two royal brothers, it's not looking that way. Prince Harry has accused Prince William of physically attacking him. That's according to the Guardian newspaper, which has seen a copy of his new book, Spare, ahead of its publication next week. The release of the book has led to a new ITV interview with the Duke of Sussex. In a clip ahead of its broadcast this Sunday, Prince Harry, when questioned about speaking out about his family, says staying silent is not an option and that some people don't want to believe his family have been briefing the press. So far today, there has been no comment from Buckingham Palace. Here's our royal editor, Chris Shipp.
If anyone was still hoping their shared grief after the Queen's death might have brought William and Harry closer together, we have confirmation today the brothers could not be further apart.
I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better.
Silence is clearly not a path Harry has chosen, and today more clips were released by ITV ahead of Harry's interview about his family and the depth of the rift between them.
Wouldn't your brother say to you, Harry, how could you do this to me? After everything we went through, wouldn't that be what he would say?
He'd probably say all sorts of different things.
And we discover relations between Harry and the King are now so bad, Harry will not commit to coming to his own father's coronation in London in May.
If you're invited to the coronation, will you come?
There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But, you know, the door is always open. The ball is in their court. There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down and talk about it.
But sitting down and talking is unlikely to be top of the royal family's priority list, given the private details Harry has shared in his book Spare. Details of a fight, an actual physical fight between William and Harry, have been revealed by the Guardian newspaper in a copy of the book they obtained. Harry writes, "He sat down the water, called me another name, then came at me. It all happened so fast, so very fast. He grabbed me by the collar, ripping my necklace, and he knocked me to the floor. I landed on the dog's bowl, which cracked under my back, the pieces cutting into me." The scene of this alleged fight was the kitchen of their house in Kensington Palace, where Harry and Meghan used to live. A photo of the kitchen, complete with dog bowl, appeared in their Netflix series last year when they spoke about how small the house was.
But Nottingham Cottage, it was so small.
Really low ceilings. I don't know who was there before. They must have been very short.
According to another extract in The Guardian, King Charles spoke to his two sons immediately after this moment in 2021, when the family gathered for the private wake after Prince Philip's funeral. "Please, boys, "Don't make my final years a misery," Charles is reported to have said, according to The Guardian's reading of Harry's book. ITV News has not seen Prince Harry's full interview, which will air on Sunday, but in the clips released this morning, he attempts to justify his decision to be so public about such private matters.
Some people will say you have railed against invasions of your privacy all your life. But the accusation will be, here are you invading the privacy of your most nearest and dearest without permission. That'll be the accusation.
That would be the accusation from the people that don't understand or don't want to believe that my family have been briefing the press.
So what about the future?
Do you still believe in the monarchy?
Yes.
Do you believe you'll play a part in its future?
I don't know.
It is hard to see how Harry and his family reconcile after this.
Isn't it? So, Chris, what do you make of what's emerged today? Allegations of a physical fight.
Yeah, where do you start? I mean, not just the allegations of a physical fight, but then I suppose you could argue, well, brothers do that. It's just that not in this particular family, and never is it shared in such a public way. I think also for me, the refusal by Harry, when questioned by Tom, not to commit to going to his father's coronation. This is his father's own coronation due in May. We haven't had a coronation, as you know, since 1953, and he's not committing to going. I mean, look, if anyone thought the death of the Queen might have brought this family back together, it's clear that definitely hasn't happened. If anything, you could argue from what we've seen so far, it's actually the worst than it would have been otherwise. Perhaps the death of the Queen has emboldened Harry to attack his family even more ferociously than he would have done otherwise.
The book, Spare, is out next week. Are you surprised that a newspaper, the Guardian newspaper, has already seen a copy of it?
Well, the Guardian newspaper has seen a copy, but also, have a look at these pictures from Spain today. A book called En la Sombra, which is Spanish for In the Shadow. Perhaps the term spare doesn't translate as well as it does in English. Is available in Spanish shops. So guess what's happening in Spain right now? Everyone's picking up the book and ringing up Spanish translators and reading what's in the book. That includes, by the way, some reports just out in the last 10 minutes or so that William and Harry begged their father not to marry Camilla and feared that she would become the wicked stepmother. Let's just back up a bit. This is the King's wife, the Queen consort. Prince William might well be going to the coronation in May, and Harry's claiming that William and Harry begged their father not to marry Camilla. There's also a suggestion around today that it was William and Kate that suggested that Harry wore that Nazi uniform. Remember the picture of Harry in that Nazi uniform? He claims in the book, again, Harry's claims that William and Kate suggested he wore it.
We will hear more from Harry in the ITV interview. What can we expect from that this weekend?
Well, all we can say is we, ITV News, have not seen this interview, even though it's been conducted by our colleague Tom Bradby. But everything that's in the book, they were able to ask Harry about. So therefore, we haven't seen a clip of Harry talking about this alleged fight scene, but they were able to ask him about everything that's in the book. So everything we're talking about now, we presume Harry has spoken about or been questioned about by Tom in that interview on Sunday at 9 o'clock.
Chris, for now, thank you very much. Thank you. Around 50,000 mourners joined political leaders from around the world at the Vatican for the funeral of the former Pope Benedict XVI. In life, the German theologian made history by resigning. In death, historic scenes once again, as it's the first time in 2 centuries that a sitting pope has conducted his predecessor's funeral. Charlie Frost on a solemn morning that saw spontaneous applause.
Thick mist lay across St Peter's Square this morning, but whilst it shrouded the dome of the historic basilica, it couldn't hide the tens of thousands of people gathering to pay their respects to Pope Benedict XVI. Clergy came from around the world, nuns, monks, priests and cardinals who, clad in their red robes, sat at the front of the crowded square. Then the coffin of former Pope Benedict was greeted with applause. As it was carried to the steps facing St Peter's Square. Made of cypress wood, it also contains a one-page account of his papacy, as well as Vatican coins minted during his reign. Pope Francis then arrived, brought out in a wheelchair to lead the funeral. This image of a living pope burying his predecessor, unprecedented in modern times. Reading the homily, Pope Francis prayed for the soul of Pope Benedict, only referring to him by name once at the end. Benedict, faithful friend of the bridegroom, he said, "May your joy be complete as you hear his voice, now and forever." As the crowd reflected on his words, the Eucharistic prayer began, the breaking and sharing of bread amongst the faithful mourners. Then the Requiem Mass came to an end, Pope Benedict's coffin carried back toward the Basilica, only pausing for a final farewell from his successor. Benedict will now be laid to rest, joining more than 90 other former popes buried in the crypt under St. Peter's Basilica. Charlie Frost, ITV News.
Go live now to Julie Etchingham, who's in the Vatican City. Julie, describe to us what you have just witnessed.
Well, as you can probably hear, they're already packing up the scene of this morning's event, which was a moment in history, the moment when Pope Benedict, who rocked the church, becoming the first to resign in nearly 600 years, was laid to rest by his successor, Pope Francis. We knew that Pope Benedict had always asked for a sombre and simple funeral. I think very many of us were struck by just quite how simple it was. There were tens of thousands of here, but it was not packed. There were just a couple of official delegations from Italy and Germany, and the ceremony itself was really based around the basic Requiem Mass that any Catholic would receive at their funeral in any parish around the world. But there were some really deeply moving moments, not least that start moment when the coffin emerged from the Great Hall of St. Peter's, a starkly simple coffin with the Gospel laid open on top of it. And when we saw the moment where his private secretary, George Ganswein, kissed the top of that coffin, it was a very singular moment. Also, the moment when we saw Pope Francis wheeled up to the altar, where we saw him sitting before the coffin of his predecessor, deep in thought and prayer, presumably contemplating what comes next, as well as praying for his predecessor. So this was a moment of history with very many moving elements. When the coffin was removed into St. Peter's Basilica, we know that it was laid to rest, in fact, in the crypt where Pope Benedict's predecessor, John Paul II, who is now a saint, was originally laid to rest. So there was that sense of continuity. But there was also that sense, too, of a moment of departure for the Church, questions about whether Pope Francis may now follow his predecessor in deciding to retire. So in a moment of history, a moment of fragility too, with very many questions hanging in the air.
Julie, thank you very much. Thank you. Back home now, and the boss of the Train Drivers Union has warned that any attempt by the government to bring in new anti-strike laws could mean it intensifies its industrial action. Members of ASLEF at 15 rail companies have walked out today in a dispute over pay and conditions. Our political reporter Amy Lewis is at Westminster. Amy, how would any proposed new laws work?
Well, Nina, for weeks now, the government's been talking about the fact that there is a need for new anti-strike laws, and we are expecting details to be released of what they actually are proposing very soon. Now, what we're expecting them to say is the fact that bosses would have the power under this new proposed legislation to firstly sue unions, but also sack staff if during strike action they fail to offer minimum service levels. So in other words, before a strike happens, the government and the unions would discuss what level of service needs to be offered. Now, the government keeps saying it needs to do this to protect the public so that when there is strike action, there are, across the crucial sectors, maintained certain levels of service. Now, what are those crucial sectors? Well, they include the health service, education, fire, border security and rail. Of course, rail workers, as you just mentioned, they're on strike today, members of the ATLEF union. Today, we've been speaking to their boss, Mick Whelan. He's been saying that he's against this proposed new strike law. He says he believes it would actually create even more strike action than we're currently seeing.
Quite simply, right, any attempt to put minimum service levels in will only exacerbate and add to the strife and add to probably more days of strike action to make up for the minimum service levels. It doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Well, Labour have repeatedly told us that they too are against this proposed legislation. Sir Keir Starmer has said today that if it was to go through Parliament and be passed into law and then he was to get into power, then he would scrap it. But as I say, we are expecting this afternoon or at some point very soon a announcement from the government detailing exactly what they are proposing.
Amy Lewis, thank you. Police in Jamaica say a British man shot dead there was assassinated in a contract killing ordered in the UK. Sean Patterson, a personal trainer from West London, was found on Monday at the villa he was staying in on the island. It was his first time visiting the country. Danny Sinha has the latest.
Sean Patterson was 33 with his whole life ahead of him, but he was shot dead whilst holidaying in Jamaica. Police there now believe he was targeted.
Our investigation so far has theorised that the murder was a contract killing that emanated from Britain. There's no evidence that Patterson was robbed or has any connection in Jamaica.
Sean had flown to Jamaica with a friend to see in the new year. On Monday, he was staying at this villa when he was shot multiple times near the pool. Police in Jamaica have reportedly arrested a 34-year-old man who'd previously been deported from the UK in 2013. They also claimed Sean had a criminal past.
Shane Patterson is well known to the UK authorities and has an extensive criminal record for a number of offences which include narcotics, violence and firearm.
The 33-year-old was said to be planning his wedding when tragedy struck. His family in West London say they now want justice for Sean.
They've took that light away from us, basically. He hadn't even started to shine yet, no children yet. He just basically started to live his life, starting to find himself. Went to Jamaica, 72 hours, he's dead.
The priority now is for Sean's family to bring his body home. Sadly for them, more questions than answers as to why he was the victim of a contract killing. Danny Sinha, ITV News.
After Rishi Sunak's big speech yesterday, it was the Labour leader's turn today to set out his vision for how he would run the country should he become Prime Minister. Sir Keir Starmer told us not to expect his government to open its big chequebook. Our political correspondent Harry Horton is in East London where he gave that speech. What exactly did he say, Harry?
Well, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have both spent the past 2 days trying to lay out their competing visions for the country and trying to differentiate themselves from one another. There has been some striking similarities between the two men, though not least their choice of venue. The Prime Minister's speech yesterday was in the building on my right, and today Keir Starmer spoke in the building just behind me. For what it's worth, Labour insists they booked the venue first. Keir Starmer also tried to adopt the Take Back Control slogan that was used so successfully by Boris Johnson and the Vote Leave campaign back in the 2016 referendum. He said a Labour government would introduce a Take Back Control bill to devolve power outside of Westminster to towns and cities across the country. He said that would end what he called the sticking plaster politics that's been so dominant in recent years. He also made some promises on spending, saying despite the fact Labour would recruit more doctors, more nurses, spend more in infrastructure, there wouldn't be a return to the big spending we'd seen in previous years.
Let me be clear. None of this should be taken as code for Labour getting its big government chequebook out. Of course investment is required. I can see the damage the Tories have done to our public services as plainly as anyone else. But we won't be able to spend our way out of their mess. It's not as simple as that.
Well, the Conservatives described this speech as a vacuous relaunch full of empty slogans, uncontrolled spending and no detailed plans. There will be an election at some point in the next 2 years. I think we can expect lots more of these speeches from both main party leaders between now and then.
Harry Horton, thank you. The Met Office has confirmed last year was the hottest on record. The UK recorded an annual average temperature of more than 10 degrees Celsius for the first time. The Met Office said it is clear human-induced global warming is already impacting the UK's climate. Finally, it's an accolade only previously awarded to the biggest music stars, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Queen and the Rolling Stones. And now the Royal Mail has given Iron Maiden the seal of approval. The heavy metal band now feature on 12 news stamps. Here's Faye Barker.
Described as bona fide rock legends, heavy metal band Iron Maiden have joined an elite club, as the Royal Mail honours them with stamps released today. Clearly delighted, the band say they're proud and excited to be honoured in this way. Iron Maiden formed in Leighton in East London, crashing onto the music scene in the mid-70s. Since then, they've sold more than 100 million records with 5 #1 albums and tours across 64 countries.
One of the great things about a band with this sort of longevity is that there is such a volume of images to choose from. But I'm really pleased to say that Iron Maiden themselves were involved in the process, so that made it a lot easier.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman.
The Beatles were the first band to be honoured with Royal Mail stamps. Their distinctive album covers the inspiration for the set released in 2007.
Is this the real life?
Queen too have been honoured, along with Pink Floyd and more recently the Rolling Stones. As the Iron Maiden stamps hit envelopes this month, the band hits the road again this summer, still touring and for more than 40 years still appealing to fans. Faye Barker, ITV News.
Mary's here at 6:30 from me and the team. Bye-bye.